I'm really excited to introduce Adam Posner. He is joining me as our guest for a hashtag Why Get a Mentor. I'm excited to share with you all his story of how he got to where he's at today and the mentors that played a role in his life. So without further ado, Adam Posner.
Garrett, thanks for having me on, man. Appreciate it.
So Adam, tell me about you, what you're doing, and how you got to where you're at today. I know that's a loaded question, but
That's a loaded question, man. I'll give you the down and dirty. So born and raised in New York is something I take a ton of pride in. I love this city. I love living here. It is the lifeblood that gets me going. It wakes me up every single day. I couldn't imagine doing this anywhere else. So long story short, when I was in college, I was entrepreneurial. I was always selling, marketing mindset, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And while I was in college, I had a bunch of awesome internships. I went to school up in Buffalo, University of Buffalo, UB, go Bulls. And I interned up there for the Buffalo Sabres and RCN, the cable company out there. And I knew marketing was within me. And also when I was home for the summer one year, I interned at Gray Worldwide Advertising. So I knew that's what I was going to be doing. Jumped in right out of school. I did that. I did some food service advertising. I did some travel and hospitality. And then I shifted gears, and I was always been a huge Howard Stern fan. I followed his career my entire life, especially as a New Yorker. I mean, Howard's our thing. And Howard made the move over to satellite radio. And I was like, oh man, I would love to work there. And I applied, I interviewed, and I got the job. And I spent 5 years working at Sirius XM. I survived the merger there, which was incredible. The growth of Howard Stern, terrestrial going to satellite, just really amazing. And then I pivoted. I don't even know why. I mean, now I know why, but I went over to American Express, which was crazy, going from, super kind of cowboy, Wild West culture to American Express, which was very buttoned up. And it was interesting. On day one, Garrett, I knew day one that I made a mistake. It wasn't for me. I felt it in my every fiber of my being, but I stuck it out. I was there for about a year and a half, and they had this big organizational change, and it was crazy. They basically said to 300 people, you could either stay and re-interview for a new job, or you could take the severance package. And I'm like, re-interview? I just went through a whole gauntlet of interviews. I'm like, screw that. And my wife was right about to have our daughter, our first child. And I took a 6-month paid severance to basically figure out what was next. And it was incredible because I was able to spend that time with her in that very critical time in our life. And it was incredible. And then I thought, like, all right, time to get back into action. And I went back into advertising. I spent some time at a couple of different agencies. And right about that time, it was the beginning of the Gary V world. It was like 2013, 2014. And I interviewed and I got the job. And it was awesome. It was like the Holy Grail. It was a holy grail. I was like, I made it. I finally did it. And I'll tell you what, man, like the first couple months were all right. And then, I had some stuff going on in my life, in my personal life. We just bought a house. I was dealing with some stresses of that and some other external factors, which we're not gonna really get into here. And I didn't bring my A game, dude. I'll be honest with you, Garrett. I didn't bring my A game, and it went downhill fast. I made some mistakes. I didn't handle things the right way. I could have done things a bit better. And I lost my job, dude. I got fired. It was terrible. It was the worst moment of my life, professionally, personally. I was embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say to my wife, to my family, to my friends. And after it happened, Gary came into the room, and me and Gary had a pretty good relationship at the time. I worked on some projects with him. I was involved in some new business pitches. And we always had like a one-to-one, like human beings, like mano-a-mano, man to man. And that's what I love about Gary, that he keeps it real and he really genuinely cares. And he said to me, the most important thing, Garrett, he said, he looked at me, my head was, in my hands like this. And he said to me, at this stage of your life, at 35 years old, you need to stop focusing on the things that you suck at and double down on your strengths. And I thought about that for a moment, and it really hit me, because basically what he was saying was, stop trying to fix all the shit that's been broken. Stop, like, maybe you're not good at what you're doing, but what are you good at? What are your strengths? What are you really awesome at? For me, it's doing what we're doing right now. It's connecting. Connecting's my superpower. That's what I do better than anybody else. And I know marketing and advertising, and I know how to just bring it all together. And he's like, well, what are you going to do with that? And I said to him, hey, I have a friend that does healthcare recruiting. And for years and before I could even get the words out of my mouth, Gary goes, recruiting. He's like, you'd be freaking, I didn't use the word freaking. He's like, you'd be freaking awesome at that. Go do it. I got your back. And as they say, the rest is history. And at 35 years old, I pivoted into a new industry, recruiting, something I knew I'd be awesome at. I jumped right in. I had some immediate success. I had some quick failure, which was good and bad at the time, right? Like, recruiting's a roller coaster, man. It's ups and downs, and you gotta, ride the highs and deal with the lows. And then about 2 years ago, I decided that I was ready to venture off on my own. And I started my own recruitment company, NHP Talent Group, that's named after my daughter, Nina Harrison Posner. She is my North Star. She is the reason I do everything. Same with my son. My son wasn't born at the time. And now I run a boutique staffing agency here in New York, focusing on digital marketing, everything, account management, strategy, creative, UI, product, UX, the entire gamut. I love what I do. I have the life that I want. I get to work from home, 15 minutes from home. I still go to the city when I need to. And, it really is, Garrett, the culmination of everything I've learned in 40 years of life. But I'll tell you, man, I still make a lot of mistakes, but now I have a different mindset where I'm able to kind of Monday morning quarterback them and learn from them and grow. And happy to share some knowledge with your guests today. Hope that wasn't too long.
No, that was great. One, thank you so much for your transparency. Thank you so much for your candor. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. That was excellent. So I want to get started with your first experience. When it came to SiriusXM, one, I'm a huge Howard Stern fan as well. I listen to him pretty much every time I'm in the car. I wanted to ask you, did they come to University of Buffalo to recruit, or were you just saying, I'm going to go and do this? Did you just grab the bull by
that wasn't my first job out of school. At the point where the point at Sirius XM, I was already working for about 5 years. My first job was actually at a food service ad agency that I applied to right out of school. And I found out later the reason I got that job was on my second interview. On the first interview, I listened to them about a problem that they were having with one of their clients. In the second interview, I came and I made a PowerPoint presentation and I printed it out. I basically did my own case study. And that's a great lesson for everyone else. When you're interviewing, think about how to take it to the next level, how to stand out. What could you do different than every other candidate? Take the next step. It's a two-way street, man. Like, the company's interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. You have to impress them. And that's how I got that job.
I love it. I think it was Brian Chesky from Airbnb. I was listening to a podcast with him, and I loved what he had said about, what's the 5-star experience? What's the 6-star experience? What's the 7-star experience? Now, obviously, he's talking about in terms of Airbnb and like what an experience is of going to one of the houses or apartments that his people are renting out. But if you're a candidate thinking about giving the type of impression that you want to give off in an interview, I think what you just hit on the head was like, what's that next level experience that it can provide? Like, okay, great. I came prepared with a bunch of scripted answers to questions that I thought that they might ask me. That's like the baseline expectation, but can you take it to the next level? And it shows that you did.
Right. And I talk about that all the time when I coach candidates in the interview process. I'm like, don't feel there's a big shift these days where candidates feel it's an interesting shift where candidates feel entitled that the onus is on the company, but it still works both ways. And it really needs to kind of be in the middle there. And I think that's something that's being lost.
I love it. So how did you discover SiriusXM? Was it a friend that recommended to you? Like, I think a lot of times I see a lot of recent college graduates that we work with where they get into a job and they might see an opportunity, but they perceive it as risky, or I don't know if I can do that, or would they hire me? Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working in the agency world before I applied at Sirius, and I feared that they only wanted people with we call brand side experience, not agency side. But I applied, I interviewed well. I knew what I was talking about, and that's how I got that job. I mean, I just applied. I didn't know anybody working there at the time, and I got lucky. And a great takeaway from that role, I'll talk about my first day there. I had two amazing bosses, Matt Downing and Debbie Ernst. And my first day there, Debbie Ernst, she literally took me by the hand, and they had 3 floors at the time. And she literally, for an hour and a half, walked me around the entire company and introduced me to every single person that she knows there.
Wow.
And the takeaway on that one, from the janitor to the CEO, you never know who you're going to need to connect with, when, and for what. And that's a lesson that I took with me. It's really about that power of connecting, that power of coming out of your shell. And maybe you feel uncomfortable introducing yourself to people, but she walked me to legal, she walked me to finance, and part of my job was getting things approved. So after that first conversation, it wasn't hard when I actually had to walk around and get something approved. They knew who I was. And that's a huge lesson for anybody starting a job. Like, just Don't just hide in your corner. I know it's easy these days with social media and, texting and everything, but like put yourself out there. Do it.
What great value that she created for you as a mentor. I mean, that's as a
Yeah.
company trying to build culture, like that is something I would say is probably often significantly overlooked. And for probably the average company, you may not have someone that's going to take you around to every person they know and
No.
introduce you. What do you
Yeah, it was old school. It was definitely old school.
I mean, what do you suggest for a young professional when they're in their job if they don't have someone that's going to take them by the hand to make those introductions? What do you suggest they do to make that happen? Do you suggest they introduce themselves? Do you suggest that they
Yeah.
go to somebody in the company that seems popular, say, hey, can you introduce me to everybody you know? What do you suggest?
There's two ways to do it, right? And I think that the first is, if you have the gumption and the tenacity to do it yourself, right? If you have that initiative to do it yourself, walk around and say, hey, I'm Adam. I just started today. I'm working in marketing. Pleasure to meet you. I'd love, when you have time in the next couple of weeks, if we could find 10 minutes, I just love to learn about what you do in this company. Simple as that. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, ask your supervisor and say, hey, I'd love if you could introduce me to as many people as possible. And I can't even fathom anybody saying no to that. But take that initiative, take that first step.
Yeah, yeah. I want to transition to your American Express experience. You mentioned that on day one, you knew not the right fit. Um, One, why didn't you quit immediately? And two, is that something, and I know that sounds like a crazy thing to ask.
No.
You knew like on the day one, this isn't the right fit. I think the obvious question is that, but I think that's obviously not putting myself in your shoes. But the
Yeah.
other big thing I want to ask was, is that something normal where the company shift whatever shift they had where they're like either take the severance or like reapply for your jobs? Is that something that happens at companies? Is that something that young professionals should be thinking about as like a possible?
Yeah. So let's talk about the first one. On day one, I think it was a combination of being overwhelmed, second guessing my decision to leave Sirius at the time. And when I left Sirius at the time, it was interesting because the company was going in a different direction. The division I was working with was going in a weird direction. There was new people coming in, so it was the right time for me to leave. So I was fine with that. I think American Express on day one, I think I was a little bit scared. It was intimidating. You know, most of the people at Amex, they came from like real solid pedigree, B school, and I was intimidated right out of the gate. There was a ton of process, procedure. It was very numbers heavy, and I think I was scared at first. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be there forever. There was something, it's hard for me to put it into words, but there was something I felt on the inside that just says it wasn't right for me, and that place just never clicked. I mean, it's a great relationships. I learned a lot. And here's a couple of great things I learned about American Express, which really helps me now in recruiting, almost 10 years after I was at American Express. One, best in class process training, onboarding, benefits, and the way they treat their employees. They best in class. I mean, it was fantastic, even through that outboard um, experience. When I took that severance package, they had, it was just a class act all the way. The second question you ask about reorganizations, it happens more often than not in much larger companies, and it also is very dependent on the economy, depends on other business factors, but it happens. Reorgs happen, and I would say most of the time, it's usually just a severance where they're cutting people out versus having to re-interview. I've actually never seen that or heard of that before outside of American Express, but it happens before, and at that point, you really have to consider yourself: do I really love working here? And if the answer is yes, that's the answer. Go interview and you'll get that job because you already have that positive mindset. But if you're on the fence about it and you have an opportunity to cut ties with something you don't love and have a cushion financially to go look for that other job without having the stress of worrying how you're going to pay your bills, why the heck not, man?
Great point. Great point. Um, so you went into Gary Vee and you mentioned, and one, I think there's a couple things that I love that you said about that. One, you didn't make excuses. Like you said that you stuff going on in your personal life, but you never said like, oh, they like this was unfair that this happened or.
No, I mean, listen, man, like, I, I, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but I will say that there were some things that they could have done better from an organizational standpoint, as far as performance reviews, training, politics, yes. But I take ownership. Ultimately, it's my responsibility. Ultimately, the performance was on me, and I didn't step up to the plate.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that transparency, that candor is huge. That vulnerability is massive, because I can tell you a lot of times I'll hear about people that, you might get fired, or it doesn't work out the way you want, and it's, somebody else's fault, or this didn't happen the way you wanted it to. And
Yeah, but let me tell you something though. It was hard at first. It took me almost 2 years to get comfortable with the fact saying that I got fired. I mean, I was telling people at first that I decided to leave, that it wasn't working. Like, it's all optics. And then I realized once I was comfortable with the truth, and that was my story, man, and I owned it, and it really opened up, once I was able to be vulnerable about what happened and honest and transparent, and opened up, like it was like a flower, like so many other things were able to come to the surface, where I could really just be free to talk about my experiences and what I've done well and what I've done not so well, and really try to help people learn from that.
yeah, and that vulnerability
It's
is
tough,
probably
dude.
like the most attractive trait. And I bet that's tough. I think that's a really good point, I think, for any student or young professional that's out there that, hears this or sees this, like everybody goes through tough times, but also the fact that you don't need to hide your tough times. Like that thing is something you can share, because that vulnerability makes other people want to attract to you. It shows them that you're real, that you're authentic.
Yeah, that was a tough one, man, and I think it really set me up well, for where I'm at now.
So how did who helped you overcome that? Who helped guide you? I know that you come prepared with a lot of like mentors that helped you get to where you're at today. I'd
Yeah.
love to learn from your perspective. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from your mentors? How do they help you get to the next level of where you wanted to be, as well as overcome the pitfalls that you may have fallen in?
Yeah, it's interesting too. I'm just looking at like some of my notes here, and I go back to my first mentor from my first job out of college, and her name is Karen Wertheim, who was just an incredible marketer. And this is something pretty important for college kids. And as a recruiter, I have a very interesting viewpoint from where I sit, because I have a wealth of experience. Not only am I a recruiter, but I've been in entry-level advertising roles that I'm recruiting for. So I know that mindset that they're in. And the toughest job for the toughest situation for any kid coming out of college into the workforce is that shift in lifestyle and behavior. The college lifestyle is complete night and day from the real world. It is completely different. You're going from a lifestyle of a varied schedule, I mean, yes, you have classes and stuff, but I know for me, my senior year, forget it. I only had night classes. I had no classes before 1 o'clock. You have to be at work every single day. You have to show up. You have to be present. You have to be alert. You have to be in it to win it. And some folks, that's real easy. Some folks, it's a logical transition. Some folks, it's really hard. Some people, young adults coming into the workforce, I see that as hard for them. It's hard for them. Listen, I implore everyone to be themselves at work, but it's not always the full version of yourself. There are things that are personal. There are things that you keep on the outside, but it's really hard for people to find that balance, right? Like how much of themselves should they be fully with at work? You know what I mean, man? And I think that's tough too, and getting into routines and getting yourself together and being in that present mindset to be your best work self at all times.
Yeah, I think what you're really doing a good job of conveying is that balance between being too casual versus being professional. Like I think,
The
it,
relationships.
yeah, yeah,
It's how you handle those relationships. And what Karen taught me was very early on was how to conduct myself like a professional. And I think that's something I've carried. Like even in jobs where, I got let go from another job previously, years back, and it's how you handle yourself in those situations. How do you handle yourself in a room when you're a 23-year-old kid out of school and you're standing there with seasoned brand marketers who've been doing this for 20 years? How do you know not to interrupt them? How do you know to listen before you speak? And I mean that in a very respectful way. Like, yes, bring your ideas, because your ideas, I'm not saying your ideas are undervalued, but just to make sure that you're understanding the full scope of the business.
yeah. Active listening skills, and just, yeah,
Correct.
no, that's super crucial. Who are some other mentors that helped you play a role in your life, and what were some of the lessons that they taught you?
Yeah, so my first job into recruiting, which is pretty cool. I mean, that was a hard pill for me to swallow. At 35, switching careers, really pivoting at a stage in life, further down the line. I mean, I was a rookie, like literally day one, starting a brand new career, and that was super humbling, man. That was a tough one, but I went all in. Like I knew this is what I was doing, and I had to give it my all, and it was a natural flow for me. But I had a great boss at the time. His name was Tom Hall. Tom Hall is an old school recruiter. He's been around before LinkedIn, before full email. Like he was using fax machines. He was cold calling phone directories and like climbing his way through. But he taught me something that I really have really capitalized on. It's plan your work and work your plan. Plan your work and work your plan. This is something I do every single day. And I did it on the subway. I did it when I was commuting in the city on the Long Island Railroad. I do it when I'm in the car now. The first thing I do is think about the day ahead of me. Recruiting, like a lot of other jobs, there's a lot of stuff going on, man. And it comes from all different angles and you have to stay focused. So every morning in my head, I have my plan. I used to write it down. I still do sometimes, but I've gotten really good at like parking it somewhere up here. I go, here's my plan for the day. Here's how I'm going to go about it. I'm going to try to block out my distractions. And if I could get through 75% of my plan for the day, that's a good day. Plan your work, work your plan.
I like it. Okay. That's really good. That's really good insight. So I know that we're coming up on a couple minutes left. My last two questions are, one, what is any insight or inspiration or knowledge or wisdom you'd like to share with our audience of college-age students and young professionals that are in this process of transitioning, maybe going into this type of field, or just in general, just guidance that you may have for them? And the second question, and this kind of goes with it, is there anything that you want to share with them about things that you're working towards, what's next for you, Adam, and some of the new things going on in your world?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate that. So first and foremost, if you're still in school, especially in your junior and senior year, I implore you, it's very easy to spend your summer sitting on the beach, doing nothing, hanging out with your friends. I implore you to find an internship in a relevant field. You need to get that real world experience. And that goes back to my first point. Those internships will give you the experience, the life experience to learn how to engage in the workplace, how to go from college human to professional human in the workplace, and you'll be able to work those kinks out. But here's something I also learned in a bunch of my internships. More importantly than learning what I liked, I learned what I didn't like. And I learned certain job functions while I was in those internships that I didn't want to be doing. So that way, when I started to interview, when I started to apply for jobs, I knew certain things to look for that's like, red flag, I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to be doing anything with budgets. I don't want to be anything with legal, finance. That's not what I want to do. As far as what I am working on right now, I'm building my company. It's fantastic. I love networking. I love connecting. I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn. If I have a couple of minutes to shoot you some advice, point you in the right direction, more than happy to do that. The day gets busy, but I really, really try to connect with as many people as possible. It's something that I always implore. Take your online connections offline. When you start applying for jobs, try to connect with hiring managers, but don't just ask them in your LinkedIn email, like, hey, I'm looking for a job. I'd love to connect. Ask them about, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do at your company. Show a vested interest in them and connect with them on a human level.
I love it. That's great insight. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining me for this video podcast. It's been excellent chatting with you, learning about your story and sharing the story with our audience.